Hi there. This is Lucy here. I'm talking to you about the module that I'm going to be teaching in semester 2 of next year, which is Contemporary Latin America. This module is a module which sort of pulls together various hot topics in Latin American politics and society today. So it generally remains more or less the same sorts of topics, but we do add in some new things. For example, this year there's going to be enough material for me to be able to talk about Bolsonaro. So we can do something like that. Anyway, so this module, as you may know, I am a specialist in Latin American politics. So this module is right up my street and covers the whole of Latin America. Obviously, we can't cover all the countries, but if you have a particular penchant or particular knowledge about a country that we haven't been talking about, for example, we're not going to talk about Cuba or Venezuela, and you might be really fascinated by them, there is an opportunity for you to study a little bit through your own essay. Anyway, okay, so these various hot topics in Latin American politics and society today, there is plenty going on in Latin America, I can assure you. But mostly when we hear about Latin America in international relations, we hear about it as if, or basically as if nothing goes on at all unless the United States is involved. But there is plenty going on in Latin America, as I say, without thinking about the USA. That is, we're taking a point of view which is from Latin America and which takes Latin American politics seriously and really sort of digs into it a little bit. This means that we do talk about some national politics. For example, somebody like Bolsonaro, we do talk about national politics and we take that national politics seriously, but we also talk about lots of international issues, but we talk about the international issues from the perspective of Latin America, as it were. Yeah, as you will see, I'll talk a bit about the content in a minute. But also, of course, many of the issues that are being faced in Latin America are classic issues being faced in the developing world. Issues like corruption, the rule of law, the destruction of the natural world, the high levels of inequality and poverty, those kinds of things. Okay? The module is essentially is organised thus. There will be 18 lectures and 9 seminars. So it's a very classic format. You have the lectures on a topic one week and then the seminar the following week. The lectures are 2 times 1 hour lectures and the seminars are 1 hour long. Okay. Oh, come on, there we are. Hang on a second. I wanted to talk about assessment. In terms of assessment, then there is an essay which is worth 45%, as you can see. You will have a choice of 5 topics, the earliest topics that we do, the first topics that we do. So you will have an essay choice of 5, or as I say, if you really are fascinated with somewhere, you can talk to me and we can devise your own essay topic. This also goes for if you want to talk about something, I don't know, Latin American football, for example. There's actually a lot of work being done on the sociology and politics of Latin American football. So if you wanted to do something like that, then talk to me and we can definitely organise for you to do an essay on that. There is also 45%, which is a pre-scene exam. Lots of you have done pre-scene exams before. I have been running pre-scene exams. I was the first in the department. Been running it for about 18 years now. I swear by them. They are good. These exams, though, is 1 question in an hour and a half, which means that I really want you to delve deep into a topic. This isn't a memory test, this exam. It's an opportunity for you in a pressurized situation, in a short number of words, to really show me what you can do. I find that pre-scene exams work really well. 10% also is for seminar participation. I've also been doing seminar participation for at least 10 years. I find it's a great deal better. It means that you do the work, and so we all have a much better conversation. People tend to turn up, people tend to get really enthused, and a magical thing happens, which is called learning. We all learn, we all have lots of fun. The seminars are really good on my modules, in part because people are motivated, they get rewarded for the work they do in seminar participation, seminar preparation. What am I looking for in terms of seminar participation? Well, I'm looking for your attendance. You need to just turn up, and even if you turn up and don't say a word, you will get a grade, okay? I'm looking for evidence of reading, that you've done some work on the topics, on the sources that I have set. I'm interested in thinking your questions, whether you pose interesting questions, things that really show that you've read and thought about the topics, an ability to listen and engage with debates, that is, pretty straightforward, and sharing information and voicing reasoned opinions. So, you can, honestly, people score highly on my seminar participations. Generally, they score very well. So there's nothing to be worried about in terms of seminar participation. Okay, these then are the topics. You'll have noticed, by the way, that we started with a conventional map of the Americas, and we've then went to as it were, a kind of upside down map of the Americas. This in many ways is the sort of way I want you to think about Latin America, placing Latin America at the top, at the focal point, as it were, but also thinking a little bit more upside down about the world, questioning some of the global relationships that we take for granted. Here you can see the map, though. The map is actually, as it were, sideways on. Now, of course, the Earth is pretty much round, so you could easily be looking at the Americas from this angle, but it's one that we don't imagine. And that word at the top, Abya-Yala, this is the word that the Panamanian people used for the continent of the Americas. So this gives you a sense as well that there are other ways to think about the world, ways that are not conditioned by Western experiences. Okay, so to think about the topics then. We start with an introduction, naturally enough. By the way, in terms of topics, I've uploaded a teaching schedule which gives you a bit more detail on this, so you might want to have a look at that. Okay, so in terms of the topics then, this is a draft, but I think this is pretty much what I'm going to do. We begin by talking about society, introducing you to Latin American society, and particularly to some of the sort of dominant social modes that are going on. One of these is Catholicism, and the other is gender. Gender, I can hear you talking, but the conditions of machismo in particular, and its and the way that women are configured in this, which is known as Marianismo, are really fascinating starting point to thinking about Latin America. So we do society, Catholicism, and gender. Then we move on to talking about society, race, and indigeneity. Now, indigenous peoples, indigenous politics is incredibly important in Latin America. It's a topic that you probably won't have encountered before, but it's a really interesting way to think about colonialism and the enduring impact of colonialism today. Partly because, of course, it's about colonialism, but also because indigenous people tend to be right at the bottom of the pecking order, and along with Afro-descendants, tend to be the poorest in society. So this is allowing us to think about the poor in Latin America, questions of poverty and inequality and injustice, but sort of through the lens of indigeneity and indigenous experience. We then move on to talking about development. Development, one of the most important themes economically that run from the moment of conquest in 1492 are the extraction of resources. And this sort of extractive economy continues to absolutely dominate Latin American economics and therefore politics and society. So we talk about mining, and it's a really fascinating topic, I can assure you. Another element that we talk about here in this section is our dams, hydroelectric dams. There's again, this is a sort of an economic strategy that you wouldn't necessarily encounter elsewhere, but it's hugely important in Latin America, but also leads to lots of social conflicts and is linked into issues of corruption, political domination, etc. So dams are highly politicized and also highly internationalized, leading us to think about questions about, who is nature for, really, and what about the ordinary people who must live with these gigantic juggernauts of massive mines and huge dam projects. We then move on to some relatively conventional discussions of politics, and I thought it would be interesting to focus particularly on one country and particularly on Brazil. Discussing, first of all, the left wing in Brazil, the Lula government, and Lula da Silva was one of the most important left-wing politicians in the great wave of left-wing governments during the relatively early 2000s. But then there has been a recent turn to the right in Brazil with Bolsonaro. So we should be looking at Lula and Bolsonaro, comparing them, talking about populism, and generally discussing politics in Brazil. We then move on to discuss a topic that lots of people find fascinating, and indeed is fascinating, and that is the topic of drugs. Here we're going to be focusing particularly on Colombia, and talking about drugs, talking about the FARC, and talking about the recent peace processes in Colombia, and particularly thinking about sort of strategies out of conflict and strategies out of the drugs market. Then we move on to talking about corruption and violence in Mexico. Now, this also entails a discussion of drugs. In Colombia, drugs are produced. In Mexico, Mexico is the center for trafficking. So I should be talking a lot about the connections between trafficking, criminal organizations, corruption, and violence in Mexico. The story of Mexico is one of incredible contrasts. I'm not going to say any more now, but it's a really important topic. Here we talk about particularly about human rights abuses, about the rule of law, about the capacity of the state to control these huge criminal organizations, that kind of thing. And the final topic, substantive topic, is migration and the USA, the US-Mexico border. This continues to be a really important area for discussion and allows us to think about also the relationship between the USA and Latin America, taking a critical look at that. So in terms of migration, we're thinking about what pushes people to migrate, what the experience of migration across that border is like, but also thinking about the USA and US policies against migration, but also the role of the sort of Hispanic population in US politics. Okay, so that's about it. I hope to see you in my module. We always have a lot of fun, and yeah, best of luck with everything. Okay, bye.